You have been conditioned to believe that the path to wealth is paved with a high salary, a strict budget, and a savings account. It is a brilliant, polished lie. The system is designed to reward the people who write the paychecks, not the people who cash them. Your savings account is not a vault. It is a melting block of ice. Every dollar you earn from a wage is taxed at the highest possible rate. By the time it hits your bank account, the government has taken its cut and inflation is already eroding what is left. You are trading time for money in a game where the currency itself is constantly being devalued. The middle class tries to out-earn this math by working harder, but wealth is not a product of effort. It is a product of architecture. The ultra-wealthy do not rely on endless labor. They build systems, and the foundation of those systems starts with a complete inversion of how you view debt. You were taught that debt is a financial sin, a burden to be paid off as quickly as possible. But if debt is so dangerous, why do the richest people on earth hold so much of it? The answer lies in the mechanics of structural debt. The middle class uses consumer debt to buy liabilities, cars, clothes, televisions, things that lose value the second they are purchased. You obsess over your FICO score so you can get a better APR on a liability, while the wealthy obsess over cash flow. The wealthy use debt as a tax-free instrument of leverage. When you borrow against an appreciating asset, that capital is not recognized as income. It functions as a tax shield. You pay zero income tax on borrowed money, while the underlying asset continues to compound in value. But how do you actually transition from the side that pays interest to the side that collects it? It requires crossing the intellectual bridge from employee to owner. An employee focuses on generating a wage. An owner focuses on acquiring equity. Equity does not clock out. It does not need a weekend. Through the mathematics of compound interest and strategic asset allocation, your capital works with a ruthless mechanical efficiency. When you understand concepts like EBITDA and opportunity cost, you stop looking at a purchase as just a price tag. You start seeing the invisible, compounding cost of capital over a decade. Every dollar spent on lifestyle inflation is a dollar stolen from your future production capacity. This transition is not about luck. It is about understanding the rules of a game you did not know you were playing. You must stop trying to save your way to a status you can only own your way into. Shift your capital out of depreciating traps and into cash-flowing assets. Utilize the tax code not as a penalty, but as a map of incentives designed to reward owners and investors. The financial system is cold and indifferent. It will quietly drain the wages of the uninformed, and it will exponentially multiply the wealth of the strategic. The choice is no longer about how hard you work. It is about where you deploy your capital. You feel the exhaustion deep in your bones. Every promotion, every raise, every bonus is instantly swallowed by an invisible tide of taxation and inflation. You did everything they told you to do. You studied, you worked late, you sacrificed your weekends for a corporate machine that replaces you the moment you burn out. That burnout is not a badge of honor. It is the symptom of a broken strategy. You are pouring your life force into a bucket with a hole in the bottom. The anxiety you feel when looking at your bank account is the subconscious realization that you are losing a rigged game. That sinking feeling is completely justified. You are trading finite time for heavily taxed dollars, while the architects of the system trade capital for tax-advantaged equity. The rage you feel when you see a billionaire pay a lower effective tax rate than a middle manager is by design. They want you angry at the player, so you never question the board. But anger is a useless emotion without analysis. You have to stop viewing the wealthy through the lens of unfairness and start viewing them through the lens of mechanics. They are not cheating. They are simply playing a different sport entirely. To understand this sport, you must step back and look at the architecture of the global economy. The system is not designed to reward effort. It is designed to reward the allocation of capital. Earned income is penalized because it requires no systemic leverage. Capital gains are rewarded because they fuel the engine of the economy. The government incentivizes what it wants more of. It wants investment, housing, and enterprise. It does not need to incentivize your labor, because your need to survive already guarantees your participation. This is the cold reality of systemic incentive. When you earn a paycheck, you are the bottom of the financial food chain. You are the liquidity provider for the asset class. Your wages are deposited into a bank, which immediately lends your money out to investors buying real estate and businesses. You earn a fraction of a percent in interest, while the investor reaps double-digit returns on your capital. The system relies on your financial illiteracy to function. It needs you to remain a passive wage earner so that the active capital allocators have a constant supply of cheap leverage. Look at the physical landscape of wealth around you. The towering commercial real estate, the sprawling industrial parks, the digital infrastructure powering the modern world. None of this was built by saving a portion of a bi-weekly paycheck. It was built through the strategic deployment of equity and debt. The environment of the wealthy is a closed loop of asset accumulation. They move capital between real estate, equities, and private business, always staying one step ahead of taxable events. Their environment is defined by ownership, while the middle-class environment is defined by consumption. In this environment, cash is not king. Cash is a melting ice cube. The wealthy view holding currency as an absolute last resort, a temporary holding pattern before acquiring the next asset. The middle class views cash in a savings account as the ultimate goal. This fundamental divergence in environmental perspective dictates every financial outcome. While you are trying to stockpile depreciating paper, the wealthy are hoarding productive acreage, intellectual property, and corporate shares. They are building fortresses of equity that generate their own weather systems of cash flow. The structural advantage of capital gains is baked directly into the tax code. When you sell an asset that you have held for over a year, the government rewards you with a preferential tax rate. This is not a loophole. It is a structural mandate. Long-term capital gains are taxed at 0, 15, or 20% depending on your bracket. Compare that to earned income, which is battered by federal, state, and payroll taxes before you even see the money. The structure dictates that $1 of capital gains is mathematically superior to $1 of wages, but the true structural power lies in not selling at all. The wealthy utilize a strategy known as buy, borrow, die. You buy a cash-flowing asset. You borrow against its appreciating value to fund your lifestyle, paying zero income tax on the debt. When you die, the structural system grants your heirs a step up in basis. The accumulated capital gains are wiped clean. Decades of wealth creation pass to the next generation completely untaxed. This is the structural architecture of dynastic wealth. It is entirely legal, entirely mechanical, and entirely out of reach for anyone relying on a W-2 wage. Let us look at the procedural execution of this strategy. Suppose you acquire a commercial property for $2.5 million. Over 5 years, the market value increases to $4.2 million. If you were treating this like earned income, you would sell the property, trigger a massive capital gains tax, and lose a significant portion of your wealth. Instead, you execute a cash-out refinance. $5 million of tax-free capital out of the property. You use that capital to acquire another asset. You have realized the gain without triggering the tax. The procedure is infinitely repeatable. The tenant in your commercial property pays the mortgage, covering the debt service on your new loan. The asset pays for its own leverage. Your net worth expands, your tax liability remains zero, and your control over the market increases. This is how $100,000 becomes $10 million over a 20-year horizon. It is a precise, mechanical procedure of trading equity for debt, using the tax code as a shield and inflation as a tailwind. Inflation devalues the debt you owe, while simultaneously driving up the value of the asset you own. The consequence of ignoring this procedure is a lifetime of financial stagnation. You are fighting a war against inflation and taxation with both hands tied behind your back. The cognitive bias that keeps you trapped is the belief that hard work alone guarantees prosperity. You have been conditioned to equate labor with value. You suffer from an action bias, believing that if you just grind harder, take on more shifts, or secure one more degree, the math will suddenly work in your favor. The math is structurally opposed to earned income. Overcoming this bias is the most difficult and urgent task of your financial life. You must brutally audit your own beliefs about money. Stop romanticizing the struggle of the daily grind. The wealthy do not romanticize labor. They optimize it, they outsource it, and they replace it with capital. The consequence of clinging to the employee mindset is that you will labor until the day you die, funding the leverage of the ownership class. The moment you break that bias, the moment you prioritize capital gains over earned income, is the moment you stop being a cog in the machine and start becoming the architect of your own wealth. You have been lied to about debt. You were taught that zero debt is the ultimate financial goal, the definitive finish line of a responsible life. But if paying off everything you owe is the secret to wealth, why do the richest people on earth carry millions in liabilities? The middle class views debt as a moral failing, a heavy weight around their neck. The ultra-wealthy view debt as a tax-free instrument of leverage. The difference between these two groups is not simply the amount of money they make. It is the architecture of how they deploy it. When the average worker gets a raise, their first instinct is to upgrade their lifestyle. You finance depreciation. This is the opportunity cost of lifestyle inflation, and it is the exact mechanism keeping you on the corporate treadmill. But what happens when you stop financing liabilities and start financing yield? Let us look at the mathematics of a tax shield. When an employee earns $1, the government takes its cut before that dollar ever hits a bank account. The worker is taxed on their labor, and they save what is left. The owner flips this equation. They use structural debt to acquire cash-flowing assets. The interest on that debt is legally deductible. They spend the bank's money to buy an asset, use the income from that asset to pay down the bank, and use the depreciation to wipe out their tax liability. The asset grows. The debt shrinks. The tax bill disappears. You are playing a game of linear addition. They are playing a game of exponential multiplication. So how do you cross the bridge from the former to the latter? It starts with the absolute destruction of your current financial psychology. You must stop trading your time for a fixed wage, only to bleed that wage into consumer debt. Your FICO score is not a trophy for being an obedient consumer. It is a tool for capital acquisition. If you are borrowing at a fixed APR to buy a depreciating liability, you are actively subsidizing the wealth of the banking class. But if you borrow to acquire an asset that produces a yield higher than the cost of the debt, you have effectively captured the spread. You have stepped into the role of the bank. The wealthy do not rely on saving their way to prosperity. You cannot outsave the erosion of purchasing power. You have to out-leverage it. Wealth is not a byproduct of working harder. It is the mathematical result of building a system where your capital works independently of your physical labor. The global financial system is cold. It is mechanical. And it is entirely indifferent to your effort. The only question is whether you will continue to fuel their machine or finally start building your own. The wage earner is the disposable battery of the global economy. You have been conditioned to seek the safety of a steady paycheck. You trade the most finite resource you possess for fiat currency that loses value every single day. The system is designed to keep you comfortable enough to keep working, but desperate enough to never quit. This is the velvet prison of the modern middle class. Inflation is the silent predator of the working class. When the central bank expands the money supply, they are diluting the purchasing power of your labor. You might celebrate a modest annual raise, but if your wage increases by 4% while the cost of living surges by 7%, you are mathematically moving backward. Your energy is being siphoned away through invisible monetary policy. The tax code is the ultimate weapon deployed against the employee. Earned income is the most aggressively penalized money on the planet. Before your salary ever reaches your checking account, the state extracts its maximum penalty. You are taxed on your gross production, leaving you to survive on the net remainder. The system does not reward your hard work. It penalizes your lack of ownership. Let us examine the exact procedure of the wage trap. You arrive at your job and generate a specific amount of economic value. Your employer calculates the absolute minimum they can pay you to retain your services. The difference between the value you create and the wage you receive is the surplus. That surplus is immediately captured by the owners of the company. When payday arrives, the structural disadvantage becomes glaringly obvious. Your gross income is hollowed out by federal taxes, state taxes, and payroll deductions. The capital has been stripped away before you even have a chance to allocate it. You are handed the scraps of your own productivity and told to budget your way to financial freedom. You cannot budget your way out of a systemic extraction model. Capital operates in an entirely different reality. Capital does not get tired. Capital does not take sick days. It simply exists, compounding and multiplying while the wage earner sleeps. When you own capital, you own the machinery of wealth creation. You are no longer the battery. You are the architect of the grid. The consequence of holding capital is exponential growth. The equity you own captures the surplus value generated by the labor force. The dividends and appreciation flow upward. And because the financial system is written by and for asset owners, this growth is shielded by preferential tax rates. The game is rigged, but it is rigged in plain sight. Realizing you have been playing the wrong game is a brutal psychological shock. You did exactly what you were told. You got the degree, you climbed the corporate ladder, you saved your pennies, yet you watch the asset class pull further and further away. The resentment you feel is not a character flaw. It is the natural response to a mathematically unwinnable scenario. But resentment without action is just another form of compliance. You must weaponize that realization. The anger you feel at the erosion of your purchasing power must become the fuel for your financial pivot. You have to stop viewing yourself as a worker and start viewing yourself as an acquirer of assets. The emotional shift precedes the financial shift. The transition from earned income to capital gains is the most critical leap you will ever make. You must move from the left side of the tax code to the right side. This means redirecting every spare dollar away from depreciating liabilities and into equity. You buy businesses, you buy real estate, you buy index funds, you buy anything that produces a yield independently of your physical presence. Capital gains are not merely a tax loophole for the elite. They are the mathematical reward for assuming systemic risk. The government incentivizes investment because capital drives the economy. When you transition to earning capital gains, you align yourself with the incentives of the state. You stop fighting the current and start letting the macroeconomic tide push you forward. Step into the environment where the wealthy operate. It is a landscape defined by silence and leverage. There are no time clocks here. There are only term sheets, equity stakes, and compounding interest. Portfolios swell in the background. Real estate appreciates quietly over decades. The friction of daily labor has been entirely removed. In this frictionless environment, money moves like water. It flows around tax liabilities and pools into generational trusts. The friction has not disappeared. It has simply been pushed down to the wage earners at the bottom of the pyramid. Up here, capital multiplies itself in the quiet mechanical architecture of the financial system. The choice is yours. Remain the friction or become the flow. You have been told your entire life that being completely debt-free is the ultimate financial finish line. You were taught to pay off your mortgage early, cut up your credit cards, and save every spare dollar in a high-yield account. That is a perfectly packaged lie. It is a psychological trap designed by a system that needs you to remain a passive employee until the day you retire. The wealthiest people on the planet do not fear debt. They weaponize it. While the middle class uses debt to buy televisions and cars they cannot afford, the ultra-wealthy use structural debt to acquire income-producing assets and completely bypass the tax code. If you are still trying to save your way to millions, you are playing a game that was rigged against you a century ago. The real question is not how to avoid debt, but how to make debt pay you. To understand how this works, you have to stop looking at money as a reward for your labor and start looking at it as a mathematical utility. When you work for a wage, you trade hours for dollars. Those dollars are heavily taxed, and whatever you have left is slowly destroyed by inflation. But when you transition to an owner mindset, the mechanics flip. Look at the concept of the tax shield. The middle class views interest payments as a penalty. The wealthy view interest as a strategic expense that legally lowers their taxable income. They borrow money at a low fixed rate, deploy it into assets that yield a higher return, and pocket the difference. This is basic arbitrage, but the true leverage happens when you combine arbitrage with a psychological barrier most workers refuse to cross. Most people believe that selling an asset at a massive profit is the definition of success. It is actually the definition of a taxable event. When you sell, the government takes its cut in capital gains. The wealthy do not sell. They use a strategy known in private banking circles as buy, borrow, die. They acquire an asset, let it appreciate, and then go to a bank to take out a line of credit against that asset. Borrowed money is not income, therefore it is completely tax-free. They live off the borrowed funds, the asset continues to compound in the background, and the inflation of the broader economy actively devalues the debt they owe. The system is mathematically paying them to borrow money. You might be wondering how you can replicate a strategy designed for billionaires when you are still relying on a W-2 paycheck. The answer lies in the opportunity cost of your current lifestyle. Lifestyle inflation is the silent assassin of the middle class. Every time your wage increases, your consumption increases to match it. You buy a better car, a bigger house, and more expensive dinners. You are taking your most powerful wealth-building tool, which is your free cash flow, and trading it for depreciating liabilities. To cross the bridge from wage to wealth, you must ruthlessly freeze your standard of living and redirect that excess capital into assets that you control. You do not need to be a Wall Street insider to understand the power of compound interest or to leverage a fixed-rate mortgage on a cash-flowing property. You just need to stop playing by the rules written for the working class. Wealth is not a product of grinding harder at your day job. It is a product of systemic strategy. It is the cold, calculated execution of acquiring assets, leveraging them intelligently, and letting the mechanics of the financial system do the heavy lifting. The blueprint is right in front of you. It is time to decide if you want to keep working for your money or if you are finally ready to force your money to work for you. The consequence of ignoring this reality is mathematical certainty. When your sole survival mechanism is a paycheck, you are trapped in a decaying orbit. Your income is capped by the hours in a day and your physical endurance. The system is designed to extract maximum labor for minimum capital. Every raise you get pushes you into a higher tax bracket, punishing your success with a heavier burden. You are running on a treadmill where the speed constantly increases, but the destination remains exactly the same. This is the dual threat of taxation and inflation operating in perfect harmony against you. The IRS takes its cut before you even see the money. Then the Federal Reserve prints more currency, quietly stealing the purchasing power of whatever you have left. You are bleeding from both sides. You are trading the irreplaceable asset of your time for a depreciating currency that is engineered to lose value. This is not a flaw in the system. It is the core operating procedure of the modern economy. The psychological toll of this cycle is devastating. You wake up every morning knowing that your survival depends on pleasing a corporate hierarchy that views you as a line item. The stress of living paycheck to paycheck is not just financial. It is a constant low-grade panic that rewires your brain. It forces you to make decisions based on fear rather than strategy. You become hyper-focused on surviving the month instead of planning for the decade. Society tells you that a high salary offers security, but that is a dangerous illusion. True anxiety stems from knowing that one corporate restructuring could wipe out your entire cash flow. You are one bad quarter, one management change, or one economic downturn away from zero. That is not security. That is high-stakes gambling where you do not even control the dice. The exhaustion you feel at the end of the week is the physical manifestation of fighting a war you are statistically guaranteed to lose. The only escape route is transitioning your focus from active labor to passive accumulation. You must stop trying to sell your time for a premium and start acquiring vehicles that generate yield without your physical presence. This is the pivot from employee to allocator. It requires a fundamental rewiring of how you perceive risk and reward. You have to stop asking how much a job pays and start asking how much an asset yields. The transition begins the moment you purchase your first income-producing asset. It does not matter if it is a fractional share of an index fund or a commercial real estate syndicate. The mechanism is what matters. You are planting a seed that grows independently of your daily labor. This is the exact point where the math finally starts working in your favor. Your capital is now in the trenches, fighting the war of inflation on your behalf. Step into the landscape of capital markets. It is a sprawling ecosystem of equities, bonds, real estate, and private equity. This environment operates continuously, agnostic to time zones, weekends, or holidays. While you sleep, dividends are distributed. While you eat, tenant leases are renewed. While you take a vacation, corporate share buybacks increase the value of your portfolio. It is a relentless, automated machine designed for one purpose. That purpose is the infinite compounding of wealth. In this environment, the rules of physics change. Gravity no longer pulls you down. It pulls wealth toward you. The architecture of the financial system heavily favors those who hold equity. Tax codes are explicitly written to incentivize investment over consumption. Governments want capital deployed into housing, technology, and infrastructure. When you align your money with these macroeconomic goals, the system rewards you with preferential tax treatment, depreciation schedules, and capital gains exemptions. Let us analyze the mechanics of why capital gains dominate earned income. When you earn ordinary income, you are taxed on the gross amount. When you generate capital gains, you are taxed only on the net profit, and often at a significantly lower rate. If you hold an asset for more than a year, long-term capital gains rates apply. This creates a massive spread between what a worker pays and what an investor pays. The system literally charges you less for making money than for making money with muscle. This structural advantage accelerates the velocity of wealth. Because the investor retains a larger percentage of their return, they have more capital to reinvest. This creates a compounding loop that ordinary income can never catch. If a worker and an investor both generate $100,000, the investor walks away with thousands more in retainable capital. Over a 30-year timeline, that annual tax spread alone generates a multi-million-dollar chasm in net worth. It is pure mathematical supremacy. The procedure for exploiting this gap is methodical. First, you aggressively audit your cash flow to maximize your investable capital. Second, you direct that capital into appreciating assets with a proven historical return. Third, you hold those assets across multiple market cycles. You ignore the daily volatility and focus on the macroeconomic trend. You do not trade. You use dollar cost averaging to automatically purchase equity regardless of market conditions, removing human emotion from the equation entirely. As the portfolio grows, you deploy advanced procedural tactics. You use tax loss harvesting to offset any inevitable losses against your gains. You utilize tax-deferred exchanges in real estate to roll profits from one property into another, legally bypassing capital gains taxes indefinitely. You structure your holdings within trusts or limited liability companies to shield them from predatory litigation. Every move is calculated to protect the principal and optimize the tax efficiency of the yield. Deconstructing the myth of the noble worker leaves you with a cold, undeniable truth. Hard work alone will never make you wealthy. The global economy does not reward effort. It rewards leverage, ownership, and the intelligent allocation of capital. Once you accept this, the traditional path of climbing the corporate ladder looks like a fool's errand. You stop competing for promotions and start competing for equity. You realize that your employer is not your benefactor. They are simply the initial funding source for your own holding company. The ultimate consequence of this awakening is total financial sovereignty. You are no longer a cog in a machine built to enrich someone else. You become the architect of your own economic ecosystem. You dictate your time, your location, and your level of engagement with the world. Capital gains are not just a tax classification. They are the mathematical key to buying back your freedom. The system is rigged, but it is rigged in plain sight. Now that you know the rules, it is entirely up to you to play the game. You have been conditioned to believe that a six-figure salary is the finish line. The moment you cross into a high tax bracket as a W-2 employee, you become the primary funding mechanism for the global financial system. You are trading time for heavily taxed dollars, while the architects of wealth are playing an entirely different game. Let us deconstruct the polished lie of the corporate ladder. When you get a raise, your lifestyle inflates. You upgrade the car, you finance a larger mortgage, you lock yourself into a higher monthly burn rate, funded entirely by active labor. This is the opportunity cost of lifestyle inflation. Every dollar you spend servicing consumer debt is a dollar that cannot be deployed into a compound interest vehicle. You are not building wealth. You are just a high-earning conduit passing money from your employer directly to the banks. If earning more money organically through labor actually penalizes you through aggressive taxation and lifestyle creep, how do the ultra-wealthy continue to scale their net worth without triggering these same traps? The answer lies in structural debt and tax shields. The middle class views debt as a moral failing or a tool for consumption. The wealthy view debt as a tax-free instrument of acquisition. When you own an appreciating asset, whether it is a business generating strong EBITDA or a portfolio of commercial real estate, you do not sell it to access cash. Selling triggers capital gains. Instead, you borrow against it. The loan is not recognized as income by the IRS. It is completely tax-free liquidity. You use that liquidity to acquire more assets, which generate more cash flow to service the debt. The asset appreciates, the debt amortizes, and your net worth expands in a vacuum untouched by income tax. This is the hidden banking system of the elite. But understanding the math is only half the equation. The real barrier keeping you on the wrong side of the wealth gap is psychological. How do you actually cross the intellectual bridge from employee to owner? You must stop optimizing for a paycheck and start optimizing for equity. The transition requires a ruthless audit of your behavioral finance. The middle class buys liabilities disguised as assets. A primary residence that drains cash for maintenance and property taxes is not an investment. It is a lifestyle expense. The wealthy buy cash-flowing systems. They build or acquire assets that operate independently of their daily labor. They understand that true wealth is measured in time, not just capital. To break the cycle, you must redirect your capital away from depreciating consumer goods and into ownership stakes. You must build a system that works, so you do not have to. Wealth is not an accident of birth. It is not the result of blind luck. It is a cold, mechanical process. It is a series of calculated, strategic decisions that separate the producers from the consumers. You can continue to trade your finite time for heavily taxed wages, or you can learn the mechanics of capital and build a machine that outlasts you. Consider the actual procedure of acquiring these assets. You do not need to invent the next tech unicorn to access the capital gains framework. You simply need to shift your acquisition strategy from consumption to equity capture. Start by analyzing businesses, index funds, or real estate not as abstract concepts, but as mechanical engines of cash flow. You are looking for systems that generate revenue independently of your physical presence. When you buy a share of a profitable company, you are buying a fraction of every employee's labor and every system's output. The process requires a fundamental rewiring of your personal balance sheet. Every dollar that enters your bank account must be treated as a soldier in a financial army, not a ticket for immediate gratification. You deploy these dollars into brokerage accounts, private equity, or commercial real estate syndications. The goal is to build a portfolio where the internal rate of return outpaces inflation and the tax burden remains structurally low. This is how you orchestrate a personal financial buyout. You systematically replace your earned income with capital gains until your labor becomes entirely optional. The consequence of ignoring this shift is mathematically devastating. If you rely solely on a salary, you are fighting a two-front war against inflation and progressive tax brackets. As your salary increases to keep up with the cost of living, you are pushed into higher tax brackets, penalizing your own advancement. The system is inherently biased against the wage earner. It is designed to extract maximum friction from those who trade time for money while offering frictionless growth to those who hold capital. This structural bias means the wage earner is effectively subsidizing the wealth of the capital owner. When the government needs revenue, they do not target the unrealized gains of the billionaire class. They target the W-2 income of the middle manager. They skim off the top of your paycheck before you even see the money. By remaining strictly in the earned income quadrant, you are volunteering to carry the heaviest tax burden in the modern economy. You are paying retail price for your existence while the wealthy pay wholesale. The psychological toll of this reality is exhausting. You wake up every day, commute to a job, and pour your finite energy into a machine you do not own. You watch your gross pay get slashed by taxes, health insurance, and retirement contributions, leaving you with a fraction of your actual economic output. There is a quiet, gnawing realization that no matter how hard you work, you are barely treading water. This is not a failure of your work ethic. It is a failure of your financial positioning. That feeling of being trapped is entirely intentional. The system relies on your financial anxiety to keep you producing. If you are constantly worried about the next mortgage payment or the rising cost of groceries, you do not have the mental bandwidth to strategize and escape. You remain a predictable, compliant cog in the economic engine. The anger you feel when looking at your pay stub should not be directed at your employer. It should be directed at your own refusal to learn the rules of the game. Acknowledging this rigged game is where your real power begins. You have to actively rebel against the traditional narrative of going to school, getting a good job, and saving a small percentage of your income. That path is a mathematically guaranteed road to mediocrity. You must pivot against the conventional wisdom that demonizes the wealthy and instead study their blueprints. The moment you stop complaining about the wealth gap and start exploiting the tax code, your trajectory changes forever. Moving against the current requires ruthless discipline. You will have to reject the superficial status symbols that keep your peers broke. While they finance depreciating luxury cars to look rich, you must quietly accumulate boring tax-efficient assets to actually become rich. It is a lonely transition. You are stepping out of the consumer matrix and into the producer mindset. In this space, logic dictates action and emotion is a liability. The towering glass skyscrapers, the sprawling logistics centers, the massive apartment complexes. These are not just buildings, they are tax shelters. They are physical manifestations of capital gains and depreciation schedules. The people who own these structures do not pay income tax the way you do. They use the very concrete and steel of their environment to shield their wealth from the government. Every time you walk into a massive retail outlet, you are stepping into someone else's equity engine. The fluorescent lights, the inventory, the point-of-sale systems, these are all optimized to transfer wealth from your pocket into a shareholder's portfolio. The environment is engineered for consumption. To break free, you must learn to see the matrix of ownership hiding behind the facade of everyday commerce. You must stop being the consumer in this environment and start becoming the architect. The difference between the billionaire and the bankrupt is not intelligence. It is their relationship to capital. Earned income will keep you surviving, but capital gains will set you free. The mechanics are laid out in front of you, waiting to be leveraged. You have been lied to about the fundamental nature of debt. You were taught that a zero balance is the finish line, that paying off your house is the ultimate symbol of financial freedom. That is exactly what the global banking system needs you to believe. Because while you are aggressively paying down a low-interest mortgage to feel safe, the ultra-wealthy are aggressively acquiring debt to get richer. The middle class treats debt as a moral failing. The wealthy treat debt as a tax-free financial instrument. If you are sitting on cash, waiting to buy a depreciating asset outright, you are actively losing purchasing power. Inflation is quietly eating your savings, and the tax code is punishing your W-2 wages. You are playing a game where the rules were written by people who own assets, not people who earn paychecks. So how do the architects of wealth actually use money? They never spend their own. Let us look at the mechanics of structural leverage. When you get a raise, you pay more in income tax. When you sell an investment at a profit, you pay capital gains tax. But when you borrow money, you pay zero tax. Debt is not income. This is the cornerstone of the wealth gap. It is not about saving 10% of your paycheck or clipping coupons. It is about understanding the mathematical power of a tax shield. If an owner has $10 million in equity, they do not sell it to buy commercial real estate. Selling triggers a massive tax bill. Instead, they use the portfolio as collateral to secure a low-interest loan. They keep the asset. The asset continues to compound, and the borrowed money funds the new investment. They analyze the EBITDA of a new acquisition to ensure the cash flow easily covers the interest on the debt. It is a closed loop of infinite capital. But to build that loop, you have to stop thinking like a consumer. This is where the modern worker fails. Lifestyle inflation is the invisible tax on the middle class. You get a promotion, you lease a better car, you get a bonus, you upgrade your zip code. You are increasing your liabilities while your assets remain exactly the same. You are trading your future wealth for current comfort. The opportunity cost of that upgraded car is not just the monthly payment. It is the compound interest you murdered to get it. It is the capital you could have deployed to acquire a cash-flowing asset. You are trapping yourself in the wage cycle, forced to work harder just to maintain a baseline. So how do you cross the bridge from employee to owner? You have to change your relationship with capital. Money is not a reward for hard work. Money is a mechanism for acquiring assets. An asset is anything that puts money into your pocket without your physical labor. A liability is anything that takes it out. The wealthy focus exclusively on the asset column. They acquire equity. They build businesses. They buy income-producing real estate. They use their wages to buy the machines that print the money, rather than using their wages to buy the things the machines produce. Once you have assets, you have leverage. Once you have leverage, you have access to the exact same banking systems used by the 1%. Breaking out of the middle class does not require a miraculous stroke of luck. It requires a cold, mechanical understanding of the system you are operating inside. Stop trying to outsave inflation. Stop treating debt like a sin, and start understanding it as a tool. The transition from wage to wealth begins the exact moment you stop trading your time for money and start trading your money for time. Realizing you have been playing the wrong game is brutal. You spent decades following the rules, sacrificing your youth for a steady paycheck, only to realize the finish line keeps moving. The anxiety you feel when looking at your bank account is not a personal failure. It is the intended psychological result of a system designed to keep you producing. You are exhausted because you are running on a treadmill powered by your own depreciating labor. The emotional weight of this realization crushes most people. They double down on the hustle, hoping more effort will fix a fundamentally broken equation. But effort does not equal equity. The sinking feeling in your gut when you see asset prices skyrocket while your salary inches forward by 3% is your intuition screaming at you. It is the visceral understanding that capital is outrunning you. You feel cheated because you were. You were sold a narrative that loyalty and hard work would buy you freedom. Instead, it bought your employer leverage and left you with a fragile illusion of security. The fear of losing that paycheck becomes a chain, binding you to a desk while the owners of capital sleep soundly. The only way to shatter that chain is to shift your focus from the income you earn to the gains you generate. Earned income is linear, capped by the hours in a day and the limits of human endurance. Capital gains are exponential. They do not sleep, they do not take vacations, and they do not ask for sick leave. When you hold an appreciating asset, the market does the heavy lifting. The transition requires a complete rewiring of your financial nervous system. You must stop asking how much you can make per hour and start asking how much your money can make per minute. This pivot separates the wealthy from the working class. It is the conscious decision to prioritize ownership over wages. You transition from being a producer of value to a controller of value. Every dollar you earn from labor is heavily taxed, heavily regulated, and immediately consumed by the cost of living. But a dollar generated through capital gains operates in a completely different regulatory universe. The tax code is not a weapon used against the rich. It is a treasure map written by the rich, explicitly designed to reward those who hold assets rather than those who sell their time. Step into the environment where capital actually lives. It is a silent, frictionless landscape of digital ledgers and equity markets. Here, wealth is not measured in sweat or exhaustion. It is measured in basis points, compound interest, and valuation multiples. In the boardrooms and private banking tiers, nobody discusses hourly rates. They discuss yield. They analyze market environments where a single piece of prime real estate or a diversified index fund quietly swells in value over decades. This is an ecosystem built on patience and positioning, completely detached from the noise of the daily grind. In this rarefied atmosphere, capital moves like water, flowing toward the paths of least resistance and lowest taxation. The architecture of this environment is built on long-term holds and strategic liquidity. Assets sit untouched, gathering momentum while the underlying currency devalues. When the owners need cash, they do not sell the asset and trigger a taxable event. They borrow against the unrealized gains. The environment is structured so that the asset remains intact, continuing to compound, while the debt used to access the capital is entirely tax-free. It is a perfectly engineered closed loop of perpetual wealth. Now contrast that with the brutal machinery of earned income. The wage system is a highly efficient extraction engine. Before you even see your paycheck, the government takes its cut. Federal taxes, state taxes, payroll taxes, and Social Security instantly slice away a third of your labor's value. You are taxed at the highest possible marginal rates simply because you worked for the money. The system is explicitly designed to penalize physical and intellectual labor. You carry the maximum tax burden so that the owners of capital can carry the minimum. The extraction does not stop at the payroll department. Once the government takes its share, inflation silently erodes whatever is left. The central banking system ensures that the purchasing power of your earned income constantly degrades. You are forced to run faster just to stay in the exact same place. The system of earned income is rigged to keep you dependent, forcing you to return to the labor market week after week. It is a subscription model for human survival, where you pay for your basic existence with the irreplaceable currency of your time. Look at the exact procedural mechanics of a W-2 paycheck. You generate value for a corporation. The corporation deducts all of its operating expenses, lowering its own tax liability before it pays you. You receive your wage, but you are not allowed to deduct your life expenses before paying taxes. You are taxed on your gross income, and you must survive on the net. If you manage to secure a raise, the procedural trap tightens. You are pushed into a higher tax bracket, meaning the system punishes your advancement by confiscating a larger percentage of your marginal effort. The procedural ceiling on earned income is absolute. There are only 24 hours in a day. Even if you optimize every waking second, your output is mathematically capped. If you stop working, the income drops to zero instantly. There is no residual momentum. The procedure of earning a wage requires continuous, uninterrupted physical presence or mental output. You cannot scale yourself. The moment you face an illness, an emergency, or simple burnout, the entire procedural mechanism of your financial survival grinds to a catastrophic halt. The ultimate consequence of relying solely on earned income is a life of perpetual vulnerability. You are one corporate restructuring away from financial ruin. When you trade time for money, you are entirely exposed to the whims of the labor market. As you age, your energy depletes, making it harder to sustain the output required to fund your lifestyle. The consequence is a delayed retirement, or worse, a retirement funded by a pension system that is mathematically failing. You end up spending your final decades managing scarcity instead of enjoying abundance. Choosing to remain exclusively in the earned income trap is financial suicide. It guarantees that you will work until the day you die, either for a boss or for the taxman. The math simply does not support wage-based wealth creation in a fiat currency system. You must internalize this reality. The consequence of ignoring it is a lifetime of financial anxiety, masked by fleeting consumer purchases. To survive and thrive, you must stop being the engine of someone else's wealth. You must acquire the assets, capture the capital gains, and finally force the system to work for you. You have been sold a polished, highly profitable lie. You were told that if you save a portion of your paycheck, avoid debt, and wait long enough, you will eventually be rich. That is not a wealth strategy. That is a containment protocol. You are probably sitting on a savings account right now, feeling incredibly responsible, completely unaware that your purchasing power is quietly bleeding out through inflation. That exact feeling of financial responsibility is precisely what guarantees you will never actually cross the threshold into true wealth. The middle class operates on a financial operating system built for the industrial age. You trade time for wages. But wages are the most heavily taxed, highly penalized money on the planet. When you rely solely on a W-2 income, you are selling your most finite resource at a wholesale discount, only to be taxed at the highest retail rate. The system is designed to keep you functioning, to keep you consuming, but never to make you free. Meanwhile, the ultra-wealthy are playing an entirely different game with a completely different set of rules. They do not work for money. They build systems that capture it. But how exactly do they bypass the tax traps that keep the middle class on the treadmill? It comes down to a fundamental, systemic misunderstanding of debt. The middle class uses debt to consume. They obsess over a FICO score just to get a slightly better APR on a depreciating liability like a car or a television. The wealthy use debt to acquire. They use structural debt as a tax shield. If you sell an asset, you trigger a capital gains tax. If you borrow against that same asset, the capital is tax-free. This is the hidden banking mechanism of the 1%. They buy cash-flowing assets, let the asset appreciate, and borrow against the equity to fund their lifestyle or to buy more assets. No taxable events, just continuous, untaxed leverage. You might think this requires millions of dollars to execute. It requires a radical shift in how you view a single dollar. So, how do you stop thinking like an employee and start acting like an institution? You have to stop trading hours and start acquiring equity. The greatest threat to your financial independence is not market volatility. It is lifestyle inflation. Every dollar you spend upgrading your lifestyle before you own cash-flowing assets is a dollar stripped of its future earning power. This is the brutal, unforgiving math of opportunity cost. When you truly understand compound interest, you realize $1,000 spent today is not just $1,000. It is $10,000 stolen from your future self. The intellectual bridge from wage to wealth is ownership. You must convert your active, highly taxed income into passive, tax-advantaged assets. Businesses, real estate, equities. You need assets that generate a yield without requiring your physical presence. Wealth is not about working longer hours. It is not about saving your pennies in a depreciating vault. It is about mathematics, tax optimization, and systemic leverage. The moment you stop trading your time for wages and start trading your capital for equity is the moment you step out of the machine. The rules of the wealthy are already written. It is time you learned how to use them. Let us deconstruct the actual mechanics of this transition. The system is designed to keep you trapped in a cycle of liquidity dependency. You are taught to rely on a bi-weekly paycheck to fund your existence. This reliance forces you to prioritize immediate cash flow over long-term equity. The tax code preys on this dependency. It penalizes anyone who needs cash today and rewards those who can defer their gratification into the future. Capital gains are the ultimate reward for delayed liquidity. When you hold an asset for more than a year, the government categorizes you differently. You are no longer a laborer extracting wages. You are an investor providing capital to the market. The system needs capital to function, so it incentivizes your participation with drastically lower tax rates. It is the foundational architecture of global finance. To execute this shift, you must restructure your personal balance sheet. Start by auditing your cash flow, identify the capital that is currently being bled dry by lifestyle expenses, and redirect it into equity-bearing vehicles. You need to purchase shares in profitable businesses with strong EBITDA margins. You need to acquire real estate that generates positive cash flow. You are building a portfolio of machines that print money while you sleep. The procedure requires ruthless discipline. You take your heavily taxed earned income and use it to buy untaxed potential energy. When that asset appreciates, you do not sell it to buy a luxury car. Selling triggers a taxable event. Instead, you let the asset compound. You let the unrealized gains swell. When you finally need liquidity, you borrow against the portfolio. You use the debt as a tax-free bridge to fund your life while your underlying assets continue to grow. The consequences of ignoring this math are catastrophic. If you remain strictly a wage earner, inflation will slowly devour your purchasing power. Your salary might increase by 3.5% a year, but the real cost of living compounds much faster. You are running on a treadmill that is accelerating. Every year you have to work harder just to maintain the exact same standard of living. Eventually the math breaks you. You reach a point where you cannot physically work enough hours to outpace the devaluation of your currency. Your savings account becomes a melting block of ice. The middle class fails to realize that playing it safe is mathematically the most dangerous thing you can do. By avoiding the perceived risk of the market, they guarantee their own financial obsolescence. This realization is deeply uncomfortable. It shatters the comforting illusion that loyalty and hard work are enough. You were told that if you just kept your head down, got a good degree, and saved a portion of your paycheck, you would be safe. Realizing that this formula is a trap brings a profound sense of betrayal. You have been playing a game you were never meant to win. But this discomfort is necessary. It is the catalyst for systemic change. Anger at the machine is useless unless you channel it into strategic action. You must let go of the emotional attachment to a steady paycheck. The fear of losing a salary keeps millions paralyzed in mediocrity. True financial clarity requires you to step into the void, to embrace the calculated risk of ownership, and to trust the mathematics of compounding capital. Once you cross that threshold, the entire financial landscape shifts. You stop looking at the world through the lens of a consumer. Every transaction, every market movement becomes an equation of risk and reward. You begin to see the invisible scaffolding that holds up the economy. You realize that money is not a finite resource to be hoarded. It is a tool for capturing equity. The transition from wage earner to capital allocator is irreversible. You can never unsee the leverage that the wealthy utilize every single day. You understand why the billionaire class pays a lower effective tax rate than their secretaries. It is not magic. It is a strict adherence to the rules of capital gains, asset collateralization, and strategic debt. You are now playing by their rulebook. Look at the physical world around you. The towering skyscrapers, the sprawling logistics centers, the massive data farms humming in the dark. These were not built by people saving their hourly wages. They were built by capital. They are monuments to equity and leverage. Every brick and fiber optic cable is an asset generating a yield for an owner who is likely nowhere near the premises. The environment we navigate daily is entirely constructed by capital gains. When you walk into a major retail store, you are participating in a highly optimized ecosystem designed to extract your earned income and convert it into shareholder equity. The products on the shelves, the real estate under your feet, the software processing your transaction. It is all owned by someone utilizing the exact tax codes we have deconstructed. You are standing in the middle of a massive, silent machine. The gears are always turning, quietly transferring wealth from those who work for wages to those who hold equity. You have a choice to make right now. You can remain a cog in this machine, trading your finite time for heavily taxed dollars until you are discarded. Or you can step outside the mechanism, acquire the assets, and let the machine work for you. You have been sold a financial lie so pervasive it is printed on the very fabric of the middle class. You were told the ultimate goal is to be completely debt-free. Pay off your house, cut up your credit cards. But if you look at the balance sheets of the ultra-wealthy, you will find something terrifying. They are drowning in debt, and they are using it to buy their freedom. The gap between your paycheck and their portfolio is not about who works harder. It is about understanding the mechanical difference between consumer debt and structural debt. To bridge that gap, you have to unlearn everything the banking system taught you about how money actually moves. Look at the math of a wage. When you earn a salary, you are participating in the most heavily taxed transaction in the global economy. Earn, pay the government, spend what is left. That is the cycle of the employee. The wealthy do not earn wages. They acquire assets, and the IRS treats asset appreciation very differently than a W-2. But how do you pay for your life if you do not take a salary? You borrow against the assets. This is where the math breaks the middle-class mind. Taking on debt to avoid taxes sounds like financial suicide, until you see the hidden banking systems the 1% use to execute it. It is called collateralized borrowing. If you own $1 million in stocks, real estate, or a business, you do not sell it to fund your lifestyle. Selling triggers a capital gains tax. Instead, you go to a bank and pledge that asset as collateral for a loan. The bank gives you a line of credit at a low APR. You buy your real estate or fund your life with the bank's money. Because loan proceeds are not income, they are completely tax-free. Your underlying asset continues to compound at a rate higher than the interest on the loan. The debt is not a burden. It is a tax shield. You keep the asset, you dodge the tax, you get the cash. But the system relies on a mathematical principle most people fundamentally misunderstand: the true cost of paying in cash. When you save up $50,000 in cash to buy a vehicle outright, you feel responsible. You avoided a monthly payment, but you just committed financial sabotage. You traded liquid capital for a depreciating asset. That $50,000 deployed into an index fund or a cash-flowing property possesses a compounding trajectory. By sinking it into metal and rubber, you did not just lose $50,000. You lost the future opportunity cost of that money over the next 30 years. The wealthy finance the vehicle at a low rate and leave their capital invested. They let the yield from their assets pay the debt on their liabilities. Wealth is not built by hoarding pennies or grinding through an 80-hour work week. It is built by engineering a system where your capital works harder than you do. It requires treating your personal finances like a corporate balance sheet. Understand your EBITDA, leverage your tax shields, protect your liquidity. The global financial system is a machine. You can either be the fuel that powers it or the architect who commands it. You have been conditioned to fear this exact framework. The educational system spent 2 decades wiring your brain to equate debt with danger and earned income with safety. They taught you to trade time for a fixed currency, pay your taxes at the highest marginal rate, and save whatever crumbs remain in a low-yield account. This is not financial education. This is compliance training. The entire infrastructure of the middle class is built on this illusion of security. It is a psychological trap designed to keep you producing, consuming, and paying taxes to subsidize the very system that extracts your wealth. Breaking out of this cycle requires more than just learning the math. It requires a complete rewiring of your behavioral impulses. When the market drops, the conditioned worker panics and liquidates. The architect sees a fire sale on productive assets. The worker views a tax refund as a bonus. The architect views it as an interest-free loan given to a government that actively devalues the currency. You must violently reject the conventional wisdom of the masses. If you follow the standard script of going to school, getting a job, and saving for retirement, you are guaranteeing a life of financial mediocrity. You are playing a game where the rules were written by the house, for the house. Look at the economic landscape unfolding around you. Fiat currency is melting in purchasing power while hard assets are being consolidated by institutional capital at a terrifying velocity. Real estate, equities, and commodities are being walled off behind a fortress of capital gains, accessible only to those who understand leverage and equity. The divide is no longer between the rich and the poor. It is between those who hold assets and those who hold dollars. The window to cross that divide is closing rapidly as inflation accelerates the wealth transfer. You have the blueprint. Stop trading your time for taxed wages, acquire assets, and force the machine to work for you. You have been lied to about the virtue of saving money. Every time you deposit a portion of your paycheck into a high-yield savings account, you feel a sense of security. You are doing exactly what you were taught. But that feeling of safety is a mathematical illusion. Your savings account is a slow-bleeding financial wound. The cash you are hoarding for security is the exact same capital the wealthy are borrowing to buy the assets that will eventually price you out of your own neighborhood. So why do the architects of the financial system want you terrified of debt while they use it to build empires? The answer lies in a mechanic called debt debasement. You are probably terrified of debt. You have been conditioned to see a zero balance as the ultimate financial victory. Pay off the house, clear the credit cards, burn the mortgage. It feels responsible. It is also the exact psychological trap keeping you entirely dependent on your next paycheck. The ultra-wealthy do not fear debt. While the middle class uses debt to buy televisions and cars, the top 1% uses it to acquire assets, shield income, and legally bypass the tax code. If you want to stop trading your time for a wage, you have to understand the mechanics of structural debt. But to do that, we first have to look at the lie you were sold about the very nature of money you were taught to save. You put your money in a high-yield account, maybe netting 4% if you are lucky. Inflation eats 3%. Taxes take another cut of the yield. You are mathematically moving backward while feeling like you are moving forward. This is the opportunity cost of lifestyle inflation disguised as financial prudence. Your wage is taxed at the highest possible rate. Ordinary income is the most penalized money in the global financial system. Every hour you work, the government takes its largest slice before you even see the deposit. So how do the owners of the world build massive portfolios without bleeding out to the tax authorities? They do not earn wages. You have been sold a mathematical impossibility. Society told you to get a good job, save 20% of your income, put it in a retirement account, and wait 40 years. But while you are waiting, the people printing the money are buying the assets you are saving for. You are playing a game of musical chairs where the music never stops, and they keep removing the chairs. Let us look at the anatomy of a paycheck. You trade hours for a fixed number of dollars. Before that money even hits your bank account, the government takes its cut. Earned income is the highest taxed money in the global financial system. Then, you buy a slightly nicer car, upgrade your apartment, and absorb the massive opportunity cost of lifestyle inflation. You are not just losing the cash you spent, you are losing the compound interest that cash could have generated over decades. You are financing your present by liquidating your future. Your greatest financial achievement is actually your biggest liability. You have been conditioned to believe that paying off your home, clearing every credit line, and living completely debt-free is the ultimate milestone of financial success. It is a psychological pacifier designed to keep you working. While you are pouring every spare dollar into debt equity, the architects of the modern financial system are using borrowed money to buy back their time. If you want to cross the chasm from wage earner to wealth owner, you have to unlearn the middle-class morality of money. The question isn't how to get out of debt. The question is how to use their money to build your empire. But to understand how the 1% manipulate borrowed capital, you first have to realize why the banking system wants you to pay off your loans while simultaneously convincing you that being debt-free is a virtue. You have been conditioned to believe that the ultimate financial achievement is being completely debt-free. It is a comforting lie. The traditional financial industry sells the dream of a paid-off mortgage and zero credit balances because it keeps you safe, predictable, and entirely dependent on your next paycheck. But if you look at the balance sheets of the ultra-wealthy, you will not find zero debt. You will find millions of dollars in highly structured, weaponized liabilities. The wealthy use debt to produce. To understand how the top tier manufactures wealth out of thin air, you have to unlearn everything you know about what debt actually is and how it functions inside the global economy. Let us look at the cold mathematics of inflation. When you save money in a traditional bank account, inflation quietly confiscates your purchasing power. You are actively losing money while feeling financially responsible. But inflation has an inverse relationship with fixed-rate debt. If you borrow money at a fixed APR, inflation actually pays off your loan for you. The dollar you use to repay the bank 5 years from now are worth significantly less than the dollar you borrowed today. The system is mathematically rigged to reward the borrower and punish the saver. Yet, borrowing money just to beat inflation is only half the equation. The real acceleration happens when you combine cheap debt with a mechanism the IRS practically begs you to use, but your accountant probably never mentions. You have been conditioned to believe that paying off your mortgage is the ultimate financial victory. You have been told that zero debt equals total freedom. That is exactly the kind of advice designed to keep you working until you are 70. If you are operating under the assumption that all debt is a financial disease, you are fundamentally misreading how modern money works. The middle class buys liabilities with credit and calls it a lifestyle. The rich buy cash-flowing assets with leverage and call it a system. The difference between those two realities is not luck. It is a calculated mathematical strategy. To understand why your savings account is actually bleeding you dry, you need to look at the invisible force the banking sector relies on. You have been sold a mathematical lie. You were told that if you work hard, save 20% of your paycheck, and avoid debt, you will eventually become wealthy. But look at the numbers. The people following that exact formula are working longer, retiring poorer, and watching their purchasing power evaporate. The game is not broken. It is functioning exactly as it was designed. You are just playing by the wrong set of rules. To understand why your salary will never make you rich, you have to look at the mechanical difference between how the middle class and the ultra-wealthy interact with capital. It starts with a concept you use every day, but entirely in the wrong direction. You have been conditioned to believe that debt is a financial sin. You celebrate paying off your mortgage, you cut up your credit cards, you sleep better at night thinking you owe nothing to anyone. But while you are draining your liquidity to achieve a zero balance, the ultra-wealthy are borrowing millions to fund their lifestyles. They are not doing this because they are reckless. They are doing it because they understand a mechanical truth you were never taught. Debt, when engineered correctly, is not a burden. It is the ultimate tax shield, and understanding how that shield works is the exact dividing line between the middle class and the 1%. Look at the mechanics of a wage. You trade your time for a paycheck. You are taxed on your production. If you want a raise, you pay more taxes. If you save that money and earn a yield, you pay taxes on the yield. The system is designed to penalize your labor and your savings. Now look at the mechanics of wealth. The wealthy do not sell their time for a wage. Real estate, businesses, equities. As those assets grow in value, they do not sell them. Instead, they use that growing equity as collateral to borrow money. Why borrow when you have millions in the bank? Because a loan is not income. The IRS does not tax debt. This single distinction is the invisible engine of generational wealth, and it relies on a mathematical principle that most people actively avoid. You were told that if you work 40 hours a week, cut back on luxuries, and put 10% of your paycheck into a savings account, you will eventually be wealthy. The people following that exact formula are drowning, while those who ignore it are buying the banks that hold your savings. You are not failing because you lack discipline. You are failing because you are playing the wrong game. The middle class trades time for a wage. It is a linear equation. 1 hour of labor equals 1 unit of capital. The problem with a linear equation is that your time is capped, and therefore your capital is capped. Worse, that capital is immediately attacked by two invisible predators: inflation and ordinary income tax. You are earning the most heavily taxed money in the financial system. You work overtime. You ask for a raise. You climb the corporate ladder. But every step up that ladder pushes you into a higher tax bracket, while the purchasing power of the currency you just traded your life for slowly evaporates. You are trying to build a fortress on quicksand. The wealthy know this. They do not trade time for money. They build systems that trade capital for equity. So how exactly do they bypass the linear trap that keeps you stuck? You have been lied to about the fundamental purpose of a savings account. The advice you were given to work hard, save 10% of your paycheck, and wait 40 years is not a wealth-building strategy. It is a containment protocol. While you are trading your finite hours for a static wage, inflation is quietly confiscating your purchasing power. Your money is sitting in a vault, earning a fraction of a percent, while the institution holding it is deploying those exact funds to generate massive returns. They are leveraging your liquidity to build their empire. You are acting as the passive supplier of capital for a system designed to keep you exactly where you are. The gap between the middle class and the ultra-wealthy is not a matter of clipping coupons or skipping morning coffee. It is a matter of structural engineering. To understand why the 1% accelerate away from the rest of the economy, you have to stop looking at how they save and start looking at how they borrow. The most dangerous financial decision you will ever make is trading your time for a paycheck. Society calls it security. The financial system calls it a trap. You have been conditioned to believe that if you work hard, stash 10% of your income into a savings account, and avoid debt at all costs, you will eventually reach the promised land of financial freedom. But the math tells a very different story. Let us look at the cold reality of your salary. Earned income is the highest taxed revenue stream on the planet. By the time your money hits your bank account, the government has already taken its maximum cut. Then you take what is left and put it in a savings account. You feel responsible. But while your money sits there, inflation is silently suffocating your purchasing power. Saving your way to wealth is a mathematical impossibility in a fiat currency system. If your money is not moving, it is dying. So, if saving is a guaranteed loss, what do the ultra-wealthy do instead? You have been conditioned to believe that your paycheck is the foundation of your financial future. Your salary is the most expensive money you will ever touch. The moment you trade your time for a wage, the system has already extracted its cut, leaving you to build a life on the scraps of your own labor. This is the fundamental trap of the middle class. You are playing a game where the rules were explicitly designed to ensure you never win. The wealthy do not play this game. They do not rely on paychecks. In fact, the ultra-wealthy view taxable income as a financial failure. So, if they aren't living on a salary, how exactly are they funding their lives? The answer lies in a mechanical loophole the banking system guards closely, and it revolves around the one thing you were taught to fear most. You have been lied to about the most fundamental rule of money. You were taught that debt is a disease, a financial cancer you must eradicate to achieve freedom. But look at the balance sheets of the ultra-wealthy. They are swimming in debt. In fact, they accumulate it on purpose. The difference between your debt and their debt is the exact reason you are trading time for a wage, while they are building generational wealth. Let us deconstruct the mechanics of borrowing. When the middle class borrows money, they do it to consume. Mortgages for primary residences, auto loans, credit cards. This is destructive debt. It is tied to depreciating assets and paid back with after-tax dollars. You earn a wage, the government takes 30%, and you service your debt with the leftovers. But the wealthy do not borrow to consume. They borrow to acquire income-producing assets, and more importantly, they use debt as a surgical tool to bypass the tax code. How exactly does borrowing money make tax obligations disappear? You have been taught that the safest place for your money is in a bank. You have been told that if you work 40 hours a week, live below your means, and put a fraction of your paycheck into a savings account, you will eventually become wealthy. That is not a financial strategy. That is a mathematically guaranteed formula for staying exactly where you are. The ultra-wealthy do not save their way to the top. In fact, they view cash accumulation as a financial liability. To understand why your savings are quietly evaporating, you have to look at the invisible engine driving the global economy and the exact mechanism the top 1% uses to turn that engine to their advantage. You have been taught a mathematical lie. You were told that if you cut back on expenses, max out your 401k, and save a portion of your paycheck, you will eventually become wealthy. That is not a strategy for wealth. That is a blueprint for becoming the wealthiest person in the nursing home. The system is operating exactly as designed. It relies on you trading your finite time for heavily taxed dollars, while the architects of the financial system trade debt for tax-free assets. The gap between your bank account and theirs has nothing to do with saving harder. It has everything to do with how you define a dollar. Look at the mechanics of a standard W-2 wage. You generate value, the government takes a massive percentage right off the top, and you are left to survive on the remainder. You take that remainder and put it in a savings account, yielding a fraction of a percent, while inflation quietly strips away its purchasing power year after year. You are trying to fill a bucket with a massive hole in the bottom. The middle class is obsessed with income. The wealthy are obsessed with equity. Income is linear. Equity is exponential. But if chasing a higher salary is a mathematical dead end, how exactly do the ultra-rich bypass the income trap entirely? You have been conditioned to believe that the path to financial freedom is paved with savings accounts and paid-off mortgages. The system is entirely designed to reward those who owe money and penalize those who save it. If you are trading your time for a paycheck, paying your taxes, and putting the leftover cash into a high-yield savings account, you are not building wealth. You are slowly going bankrupt, safely. The gap between your wage and actual wealth is not a matter of skipping your morning coffee. To understand why the middle class is mathematically locked out of the highest tiers of wealth, you have to look at the exact mechanism that turns your paycheck into a liability before it even hits your bank account. You have been programmed to believe that being completely debt-free is the ultimate financial victory. You celebrate paying off the mortgage. You cut up the credit cards. You think you have finally won the game. But the people who actually own the board are laughing at you. Zero debt is not a badge of honor. It is a profound misunderstanding of how capital actually works. Debt is not merely a penalty for the poor. It is the primary currency of the ultra-wealthy. The difference is entirely in the mechanics. When you earn a wage, you are taxed on your labor before you even see the money. You take whatever is left over, and you use it to buy depreciating liabilities. You finance these with consumer debt, paying a premium in APR for the privilege of owning something that loses value every time the sun comes up. You are trading your finite time for heavily taxed dollars to buy objects that actively destroy your net worth. It is a mathematical dead end. But what happens when you stop trading time for wages and start trading assets for leverage? You have been conditioned to believe that a high salary is the finish line of financial success, that your income is your ultimate wealth-building tool. That is a mathematical lie. It is a psychological trap designed to keep you trading time for money until you die. If a high income was the secret to wealth, doctors and lawyers wouldn't be drowning in consumer debt and working 70-hour weeks just to maintain their zip code. Income is not wealth. Income is just the raw material. What you do with that raw material determines whether you remain an employee or become an owner. But to cross that bridge, you have to unlearn the fundamental rule the middle class treats as gospel, the belief that all debt is evil. The ultra-wealthy do not avoid debt, and the mechanics of how they do this reveal exactly why the wealth gap continues to explode. Since childhood, you were taught that owing money is a moral failing. You were told that paying off your mortgage, cutting up your credit cards, and reaching absolute zero debt is the ultimate pinnacle of financial freedom. If that is true, why do the wealthiest individuals on the planet intentionally carry billions of dollars in liabilities? The answer exposes the exact mechanism keeping the middle class trapped in a cycle of wage dependency. To cross the bridge from employee to owner, you have to understand the difference between a financial trap and a financial tool. Your savings account is quietly bleeding you dry, and the harder you work for your paycheck, the further you fall behind. We are taught that the path to financial freedom is paved with overtime, skipped lattes, and a high-yield savings account. That is a sanitized lie. It is a mathematical trap designed to keep you trading the only non-renewable resource you have, your time, for a currency that loses value every single day. The divide between the middle class and the ultra-wealthy has nothing to do with waking up at 4 in the morning to work harder. It has everything to do with a fundamental misunderstanding of what money actually is. If you want to stop working for capital and start making capital work for you, you have to understand the invisible mechanics of the wealth gap. And it starts with the most misunderstood concept in modern finance. Your parents, your teachers, and every popular financial guru on the internet have hammered the exact same narrative into your skull. They tell you debt is a trap, and paying it off is the ultimate path to financial freedom. But while you are aggressively paying down your mortgage and cutting up your credit cards, the ultra-wealthy are quietly accumulating massive amounts of debt. They are not doing it because they are broke. They are doing it because debt is the single most powerful tax-free wealth generation engine in the modern financial system. The question is, why does their debt make them richer while your debt keeps you trapped in a cubicle? To understand the gap between the working class and the owning class, you have to look at the mechanics of leverage. You have been lied to about what a paycheck actually is. Society tells you a high salary is the finish line. The truth is that a standard wage is the most expensive money you will ever touch. It is the exact reason you feel trapped on a treadmill, running faster every year just to stand still. While you are trying to budget your way to freedom, the architects of the global financial system are playing an entirely different game. They do not save their way to wealth. They engineer it. And the first rule they exploit is the one you were taught to fear. You were trained to view debt as a moral failing. Pay off your balances, clear your mortgage. That is excellent advice if your goal is to remain a well-behaved employee. But if you want to cross the chasm from wage earner to owner, you have to understand the mechanics of structural debt. When you earn $1 of wage income, the government takes its cut before the money even hits your account. You are taxed on your raw production. But when the ultra-wealthy want to buy a luxury property or fund a lifestyle, they do not sell their assets and trigger massive tax events. They borrow against them. You have been conditioned to believe that a high salary is the ultimate financial finish line. A high salary is simply the most comfortable trap ever engineered. You are trading finite time for heavily taxed dollars, while the architects of the economy trade systems for equity. The gap between your paycheck and true wealth is not a matter of saving an extra 10%. It is a fundamental misunderstanding of financial mechanics. Let us look at the mathematics of the modern worker. When you earn a wage, you are the last in line to get paid. The government takes its share. The inflation tax silently erodes your purchasing power, and you are left to build a life on the scraps. This is the W-2 illusion. The middle class tries to out-earn this system by working harder, chasing promotions, and trading more time for a slightly larger slice of a shrinking pie. But wealth is not created by increasing your active income. Wealth is created by detaching your time from your money. When you analyze the EBITDA of a successful private company, you realize the owners are not taking massive personal salaries. They are leaving capital inside the corporate structure to compound, shielding it from personal income tax rates. They do not care about their paycheck. They care about their balance sheet, and they utilize a tool that the middle class is explicitly taught to fear. You have been taught that the ultimate financial goal is a high salary, that a six-figure paycheck is the finish line. A high salary does not make you wealthy. It makes you the most heavily taxed, highly targeted demographic in the global financial system. The moment you trade your time for a wage, you are playing a game designed for you to lose. The wealthy do not want a paycheck. They actively avoid it. And until you understand exactly why, you will remain trapped on the wrong side of the wealth gap. Look at the mechanics of earned income. You generate value, your employer takes a cut, the government takes a massive percentage off the top, and you are left with the scraps to fund your life. The ultra-wealthy operate on a completely inverted system. They are not taxed on production because they do not produce labor. And the tax code, written by asset owners, heavily subsidizes the acquisition and holding of assets. But if they do not have a salary, How do they actually pay for their opulent lives? The answer lies in a banking mechanism that the middle class has been conditioned to fear. You study, you climb the corporate ladder, you finally hit that magical number, and you think you have won the game. But that high-paying W-2 job is actually the most efficient trap ever designed to keep you exactly where you are. The system does not reward how hard you work. It rewards how you structure your income. And right now, your structure is bleeding you dry. You have been lied to about your savings account. The money you are hoarding in the bank is not a safety net. Society tells you to work hard, save 10% of your paycheck, and wait 40 years. That is the blueprint for a comfortable, quiet mediocrity. It is also a mathematical guarantee that you will never actually be wealthy. The financial elite do not save their way to the top. They engineer their way there, and the mechanism they use is entirely invisible to the working class.